Hey guys, tonight we find ourselves amidst the chaos and clamor of revolutionary France. Can you feel the cobblestones beneath your feet? Hear the cries of liberté, égalité, fraternité echoing through the Parisian streets. Imagine the smoky haze of gunpowder mingling with the aroma of freshly baked bread, a truly intoxicating, if slightly dangerous, combination. Because let's be honest, being around revolutionary mobs isn't exactly risk-free. You probably won't survive this, but, hey, you get a story out of it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always wild to see where you're all tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're a fresh-faced artillery officer, barely out of your teens, with a name that feels foreign on the tongue, Napoleon Bonaparte. See, even his name sounded like a declaration of war. You're stationed in Toulon, a key port city that's currently in the hands of British royalists. The siege is dragging on, a frustrating stalemate that's testing everyone's patience. Cannons boom in the distance, the earth trembling with each impact. The French forces are disorganized, leadership is lacking, and the whole operation feels like a recipe for disaster. But you see an opportunity. You don't just see an opportunity, you obsess over it. Your mind races, calculating angles, trajectory, and wind resistance. You've got a bold plan to seize a strategic high ground that will allow you to pound the British fleet into submission. Your superiors, however, are less than enthusiastic. They see you as a Corsican upstart, a nobody with an outlandish accent and even more outlandish ideas. But you persist, using your undeniable charisma and your surprisingly persuasive arguments, which, let's be honest, probably involved a fair amount of arm-waving and yelling. You finally manage to convince them to give you a shot. Maybe they just got tired of your nagging. And then, everything changes. Under your direction, the French artillery becomes a relentless, coordinated force. You personally oversee the placement of each cannon, barking orders with an intensity that belies your youth. You sleep little, eat less, and drive yourself, and everyone around you, to the brink of exhaustion. Cannonballs scream overhead, explosions rock the earth, and the air fills with the acrid smell of gunpowder. The British ships are battered, their crews demoralized, and the defenses crumble. Toulon falls. It's a stunning victory, and you are the hero. Promotions come quickly, accolades pile up, and suddenly, you're Napoleon Bonaparte, a name that's whispered with respect and awe throughout France. Not bad for a kid from Corsica, huh? This victory wasn't just about artillery, though. It was about something deeper, something that would define Napoleon's entire career, a need for speed. See, Napoleon understood something that many of his contemporaries didn't: information was power. The faster you could communicate, the faster you could react, and the faster you could move your armies, the greater your chances of victory. He was obsessed with efficiency, streamlining everything from the way his troops marched to the way messages were delivered. He knew that a well-timed order, delivered swiftly and accurately, could be the difference between success and failure. You're now a rising star in the French army, but the political landscape is as volatile as ever. The French Revolution is in full swing, and the government is constantly changing hands. It's a dangerous time, but also a time of incredible opportunity. You find yourself commanding troops in Italy, facing off against the Austrians, who, let's be fair, had been the traditional bad guys of Europe for centuries. But this time, things will be different, very different. You arrive to find your army demoralized, under-equipped, and frankly, starving. They're a ragtag bunch, more resembling a band of brigands than a disciplined fighting force. But you see potential, and with your fiery speeches and promises of glory and plunder, you quickly whip them into shape. You instill in them the same sense of urgency that drives you. Soldiers, you proclaim, you are ill-fed and nearly naked. I will lead you into the most fertile plains in the world. Rich provinces, great cities will be in your power. There you will find honor, glory, and wealth. A bit theatrical? Maybe. Effective? Absolutely. You launch a lightning-fast campaign, moving your troops with unprecedented speed and audacity. You outmaneuver the Austrians at every turn, exploiting their weaknesses and catching them off guard. Battles are won with daring tactics and sheer audacity. You seem to be everywhere at once, inspiring your troops, directing artillery fire, and personally leading charges. Your soldiers, fueled by your charisma and the promise of loot, follow you with unwavering loyalty. One particularly daring maneuver involves crossing the Alps, a feat previously thought impossible during that time of year. You don't just cross the Alps, you practically sprint across them, dragging cannons and supplies over treacherous mountain passes. It's an arduous journey, but you push your men relentlessly, knowing that speed is of the essence. The Austrians are completely taken by surprise when you suddenly appear in their rear, and their forces collapse. Historians still argue whether Napoleon's success was due to his military genius, his charisma, or simply the weakness of his enemies. But whatever the reason, the results are undeniable. You conquer much of Italy, establishing French dominance and sending vast amounts of wealth back to Paris. You become a national hero, the darling of the French people. Your star is rising higher and higher. It seems nothing can stop you. One quirky tidbit. During this campaign, Napoleon insisted on using carrier pigeons to send messages back to Paris. He even established a pigeon post, ensuring that news of his victories arrived quickly and reliably. Imagine the scene: fierce battles, daring maneuvers, and a flock of pigeons fluttering across the sky, carrying vital dispatches. It's almost comical, but it worked. The French Directory, the governing body in Paris, becomes increasingly wary of your popularity. They see you as a potential threat to their power, and they try to sideline you by sending you on a campaign to Egypt. This is a strategic move, aimed at disrupting British trade routes to India. It's also a convenient way to get you out of the country. You accept the mission, but not without a sense of unease. You know that Egypt is a dangerous place, far from home, and that the British Navy controls the seas. But you see it as another opportunity, a chance to prove yourself and to expand French influence. You assemble a large army and set sail for Egypt. You don't just bring soldiers, you bring scientists, engineers, and scholars, all eager to study the ancient wonders of Egypt. You intend to conquer, but also to learn. The campaign starts well. You land in Egypt and quickly defeat the Mamluk forces at the Battle of the Pyramids. Soldiers, you famously declared, 40 centuries look down upon you from these pyramids. A bit melodramatic? Perhaps. But it had an effect on his troops, and that's all that mattered. You seize Cairo and establish French control over much of the country. But then, disaster strikes. The British Navy, under the command of Admiral Nelson, annihilates the French fleet at the Battle of the Nile. You and your army are now stranded in Egypt, cut off from France. The situation is dire, but you refuse to give up. You press on, attempting to consolidate your control over Egypt and even launching an expedition into Syria. One mainstream historical fact is that the Rosetta Stone was discovered during Napoleon's Egyptian campaign. This artifact, with its inscriptions in 3 different scripts, proved to be the key to deciphering ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. It was a monumental discovery, and it highlighted the importance of Napoleon's expedition, even in the face of military setbacks. But the campaign is ultimately doomed. Disease and resistance take their toll on your troops, and the British Navy blockades the Egyptian coast. You realize that your position is untenable, and you make a daring decision: you abandon your army and slip back to France, leaving your subordinates to deal with the fallout. A bit ruthless? Sure. But you have bigger things in mind. When you arrive back in France, you find the country in a state of turmoil. The Directory is weak and corrupt, and the people are disillusioned. You seize the opportunity, staging a coup d'état and establishing yourself as first consul. You are now the most powerful man in France. The rise to power was, in a way, meteoric. Who would have thought that an artillery officer from Corsica could achieve so much? And it's all thanks to his vision, his drive, and his obsession with speed. But how long can that momentum last? Okay, settle in, settle in. Let's talk about the postal system. Or, well, the lack of a postal system before Napoleon showed up and decided to actually, organize things. Imagine, you're living in, say, France, sometime in the 1700s. Maybe you're a merchant, a landowner, a lovelorn poet, doesn't really matter. What does matter is that you need to get a message across the country. To, I don't know, maybe your cousin in Lyon who owes you money, or the silk merchant in Paris who hasn't sent you your fabric yet. Good luck with that. Because the postal landscape? It's less a landscape and more like, a swamp. A bog. A murky, inefficient mess where your precious letter has about the same chance of arriving safely as a politician telling the complete truth. It wasn't one cohesive, centrally controlled system. Oh no, that would be far too simple. Instead, you have a patchwork of competing, overlapping, and often downright hostile postal services. Think of it like trying to navigate the streaming service market today. You want to watch a specific show, but it's spread across 4 different platforms, each with its own subscription fee and annoying interface. Only, instead of shows, it's letters, and instead of subscription fees, it's, well, more fees, plus bribes, and the nagging suspicion that your letter is being read by someone who really shouldn't be reading it. You trudge down to the local inn, which, for reasons that are lost to the mists of time, also serves as a postal hub. The air is thick with the smells of stale beer, unwashed travelers, and something vaguely, gamey. You approach the innkeeper, a burly fellow with a suspicious eye and a permanent sheen of perspiration. He grunts at you. Letter to Lyon, eh? That'll be 2 sous. And that, my friends, is just the beginning. Because this innkeeper is probably working for some local nobleman who has decided to set up his own private postal service. Because why not? It's not like anyone is stopping him. He probably has a deal with some stagecoach drivers, who are notoriously unreliable and prone to, well, let's just say they have a flexible definition of on time. Your letter might get there in a week, it might get there in a month, it might end up being used to light someone's pipe. Who knows? And that's just one of your options. You could also try the Royal Postal Service, which sounds official and important, but in reality, is just as inefficient as everything else. They're also notoriously expensive, and tend to prioritize letters from important people, the kind of people who don't actually need to worry about getting letters delivered. The official Royal Postal Service, for instance, had a rather annoying habit of charging by the page, meaning that the cost of sending a long letter could be astronomical. Writing a heartfelt novel to your beloved? Better hope they love you enough to reimburse you for the postage. Or, maybe you decide to go rogue and entrust your letter to a traveling merchant. He's heading in the general direction of Lyon anyway, and he seems honest enough. Famous last words, right? He might deliver it. He also might lose it, forget about it, or sell it to some blackmailer for a quick buck. Hey, a guy's gotta eat. It's a risky business, this letter-sending game. Adding to the chaos, different regions had different postal regulations, different rates, and different standards of, well, everything. Historians still argue whether this fragmentation was a deliberate attempt by local powers to maintain control, or simply a result of general administrative incompetence. I'm leaning towards incompetence myself. Occam's razor and all that. But let's say, against all odds, your letter does make it to Lyon. Hooray! Don't celebrate just yet. Because now the recipient has to pay to receive it. Yes, you heard that right. The person getting the letter pays the postage. Which means your cousin in Lyon might just decide that he doesn't really need to hear from you after all, especially if he knows you're just going to ask for your money back. He might just refuse to accept the letter, which then gets sent back to you, and you end up paying even more money for the privilege of not communicating with your cousin. It's a postal system designed to frustrate, to delay, and to generally make your life miserable. And it's ripe for abuse. Smugglers used it to move contraband. Spies used it to exchange secret messages, often using elaborate codes and ciphers. And ordinary citizens? Well, they mostly just complained about it. Which, let's be honest, is a time-honored tradition that continues to this day. I mean, have you seen the price of postage stamps lately? Now, you might be thinking, okay, this sounds terrible. But surely there were some benefits to this chaotic system, right? Well, maybe. Some historians argue that the lack of centralized control allowed for a greater degree of freedom of expression. Without a single postal authority censoring the mail, people could theoretically write whatever they wanted, without fear of government reprisal. Emphasis on theoretically. Because in reality, there were plenty of other ways for the authorities to keep tabs on people. Like, spies. And informers. And the aforementioned letter-reading innkeepers. There were also some genuinely quirky aspects to this pre-Napoleonic postal landscape. For instance, did you know that carrier pigeons were still used to deliver messages in some areas? Yes, pigeons. Not just for love notes, either. Businesses used them to transmit stock prices and other urgent information. Imagine relying on a bird to get your stock trades in on time. Talk about high-stakes birdwatching. And then there's the whole issue of lost mail. Where did all those letters go? Some of them probably ended up in attics, gathering dust for centuries. Others were used as wrapping paper, or even, toilet paper. Seriously. Paper was expensive, And necessity is the mother of invention, as they say. One can only imagine what historical secrets have been wiped clean away. We also need to consider the sheer physical effort involved in delivering the mail. Before the advent of trains and automobiles, letters were transported by foot, by horse, or by stagecoach. Messengers often had to travel long distances, through dangerous terrain, in all kinds of weather. They were essentially the delivery drivers of their day, but without the benefit of GPS or heated seats. You trudge along muddy roads, rain plastering your hair to your face, hoping you don't encounter any bandits or get eaten by wolves. It was not a glamorous job, to say the least. And the pay? Let's just say it wasn't exactly a lucrative profession. Many postal workers supplemented their income with, let's call them, side hustles. Which could range from selling information to blackmailers to simply pilfering the occasional package. It wasn't exactly ethical, but hey, a man's gotta eat, right? Sound familiar? There was also the issue of literacy. In a society where many people couldn't read or write, sending and receiving letters was a privilege reserved for the wealthy and educated. The average peasant probably didn't have much use for a postal system, unless he was being drafted into the army or something equally unpleasant. This meant that the postal system, in its fragmented and inefficient state, actually reinforced existing social inequalities. The whole system feels like something dreamed up after a particularly potent cheese dream. A complex, nonsensical web of competing interests and conflicting regulations, held together by a combination of desperation, bribery, and sheer dumb luck. It's a wonder anything ever got delivered at all. One slightly amusing side effect of this system was the rise of professional letter writers. If you couldn't write, you could hire someone to compose a letter for you. These scribes would set up shop in public squares or marketplaces, offering their services to the illiterate masses. They were essentially the ghostwriters of the 18th century. And some of them were quite good at it, crafting eloquent and moving letters for their clients. Some even offered pre-written templates for common situations, like love letters, or letters of complaint. Dear Sir, I am writing to inform you that your turnips are subpar. So, yeah. The pre-Napoleonic postal system. A fragmented, unreliable mess that somehow managed to function, despite all odds. It was a system ripe for reform, just waiting for someone with the vision and the dictatorial tendencies to come along and shake things up. And who better to do that than a certain Corsican general with a penchant for order and a deep-seated belief in his own genius? But that, as they say, is a story for another time. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go check my mailbox. Just in case that letter from Lion finally arrived. Although, at this point, I'm pretty sure my cousin is just avoiding me. Alright, settle in, cozy up. Let's talk about Napoleon and the mail. Yes, that Napoleon. The short, Corsican fella with the complex about his height. Ironically, he was actually of average height for the time. Go figure. You trudge along the cobblestone streets of Paris, the year is 1800-ish, and the air hangs thick with the smell of coal smoke and ambition. You're trying to deliver a letter, maybe a love note, maybe a business proposal, the details don't really matter. What does matter is getting it there, and that, my friend, is about to get a whole lot more complicated. Napoleon, freshly installed as first consul, basically the big cheese, has his eye on everything. And I mean everything. He's reorganizing France, rewriting laws, and generally trying to mold the entire nation into his personal vision. And you know what's a vital organ in the body politic? The postal service. Before Napoleon, the postal system in France was, well, let's just say it was a bit of a free-for-all. Different entities ran their own little postal networks, often overlapping and competing. Think of it like having 5 different companies all vying to be your phone carrier, except instead of dropped calls, you have lost letters and exorbitant fees. It was messy, inefficient, and definitely not something a control freak like Napoleon could tolerate. So, naturally, he sets about centralizing it. Imagine him, pacing back and forth in his office, muttering about order and efficiency, while Josephine rolls her eyes in the corner. He decrees that the state will have a monopoly on postal services. That's right, no more independent mail carriers undercutting the government. He wants control, top to bottom. This wasn't just about streamlining the process, oh no. It was also about control. See, information is power, and the postal service is the artery through which that information flows. By controlling the mail, Napoleon could control the narrative. He could monitor communications, suppress dissent, and generally keep a closer eye on his empire. It's like the internet today, but with more sealing wax and fewer cat videos. Though I'm sure if cats existed in 1800s France, they'd somehow find their way into the postal system. Probably as a distraction. He establishes a new administration, the Direction Générale de Postes, headed by a loyal general, Antoine Lavalette. Now, Lavalette wasn't exactly a postal expert, but he was fiercely loyal to Napoleon, and that, in Napoleon's book, was worth more than any amount of postal know-how. Lavalette was tasked with bringing order to the chaos, standardizing procedures, and weeding out any potentially disloyal elements within the postal workforce. Which, let's be honest, probably made for some awkward office parties. You, the weary letter carrier, now find yourself working for the state. Your routes are more defined, your duties more regulated. You probably have to wear some kind of uniform, and heaven forbid you're caught chatting with the local baker for too long, because someone is definitely watching. And by someone, I mean Napoleon's secret police. They're everywhere, like mosquitoes at a summer picnic. Speaking of which, did you know that Napoleon supposedly had a special fondness for pigeons? Not in a creepy, pigeon-hoarding way, but he recognized their value as messengers, especially during wartime. He even employed pigeon post services, which, to be fair, is pretty cool. Imagine sending a crucial message strapped to the leg of a tiny, feathered courier. It's like a 19th century text message, but with added bird poop. Historians still argue whether Napoleon's motivations were purely strategic or if there was a touch of paranoia involved. Was he genuinely trying to improve the postal service for the benefit of France, or was he just obsessed with controlling every aspect of his empire? Probably a bit of both, to be honest. Most historical figures aren't one-dimensional villains, no matter how much they might seem like it. Even Napoleon probably had moments of doubt, of self-reflection, probably while soaking in a luxurious bubble bath, surrounded by rubber duckies. Okay, maybe not rubber duckies. One of the key innovations Napoleon introduced was the standardization of postal rates. Before, the cost of sending a letter depended on all sorts of factors, including the distance, the weight, and the mood of the postmaster. It was a nightmare. But Napoleon implemented a system based on distance, making it much simpler and more predictable. You could actually calculate how much it would cost to send a letter to your cousin in Marseille without having to consult a fortune teller first. This standardization, coupled with the increased efficiency of the centralized system, made the postal service more accessible to the general public. More people could afford to send letters, and those letters were more likely to arrive safely and on time. This, in turn, boosted trade, communication, and the overall sense of national unity. You know, all the things Napoleon was aiming for. Of course, this centralization came at a cost. The postal service became a tool of state surveillance. Letters were routinely opened and read by government officials, looking for signs of dissent or conspiracy. It's like having the NSA reading your emails, except with more quill pens and less encryption. You, the aforementioned letter carrier, are now caught in the middle. You're responsible for delivering the mail, but you're also aware that your every move is being watched. You might even be asked to report suspicious activity to your superiors. It's a moral quandary, a constant balancing act between loyalty to your country and respect for the privacy of your fellow citizens. Fun times. Adding insult to injury, Napoleon wasn't exactly known for being a generous employer. Postal workers weren't exactly swimming in cash. Many supplemented their income with side hustles, some more legitimate than others. And let's just say that if you happen to lose a particularly valuable package, nobody would be too surprised. It's tough out there. Beyond the mechanics, Napoleon understood the power of propaganda. He used the postal service to disseminate official news and information, shaping public opinion and promoting his own image. Imagine receiving a letter that's essentially an advertisement for Napoleon's greatness. Read all about Napoleon's glorious victory at Austerlitz. Only 9 sous. He was a master of spin, even before the invention of the printing press as we know it today. You might think, okay, Napoleon centralized the postal service. Big deal. What's so interesting about that? Well, consider the long-term consequences. Napoleon's reforms laid the foundation for the modern postal system in France, and his ideas influenced postal systems around the world. He showed how a centralized, efficient postal service could be a powerful tool for governance, communication, and even control. It was a blueprint for future leaders, for better or for worse. And speaking of leaders, there's a story, probably apocryphal, about Napoleon inspecting a post office. He supposedly noticed a clerk struggling to sort a particularly large pile of mail. Napoleon, never one to shy away from a bit of hands-on management, supposedly jumped in and started helping out, sorting letters with remarkable speed and efficiency. The moral of the story? Even dictators can have a knack for logistics. Or maybe it just shows that you should never underestimate the power of a good filing system. You, still trudging those Parisian streets, probably don't think about all this as you deliver your letters. You're just trying to make a living, to get the mail to its destination, to avoid getting arrested by the secret police. But you are part of something bigger, something that Napoleon has shaped and molded. You are a cog in the machine, a link in the chain. And as you drop that last letter into the mailbox, you can't help but wonder, who's reading it? And what will they do with the information it contains? It's a question that probably keeps you up at night. Try not to worry too much, though. Just remember that even Napoleon eventually met his match. Even empires crumble. Oh, and a fringe tidbit for you, did you know that some historians believe that Napoleon actually used the postal service to spread rumors and misinformation about his enemies? It's a classic example of psychological warfare, using the very arteries of communication to undermine your opponents. Pretty sneaky, eh? But also, kinda smart. So, there you have it. Napoleon and the mail. Not exactly the sexiest topic, I know, but hopefully I've managed to make it at least somewhat interesting. Sweet dreams. Alright, settle in, pull up a comfy chair. Maybe brew yourself some chamomile tea. Today, we're diving deep into the shadowy world of the Cabinet Noir. Sounds mysterious, doesn't it? Like some sort of ultra-exclusive, dimly lit nightclub where international spies sip martinis and exchange coded glances. And, well, in a way, it was. Except instead of martinis, it was probably more like lukewarm wine and questionable cheese. And instead of glances, it was opened mail. You trudge down a Parisian street, cobblestones slick with a recent rain. The air is thick with the smells of wood smoke and freshly baked bread, a potent combination that almost masks the less pleasant aromas of open sewers. You're on your way to deliver a letter, carefully penned and sealed with wax. You pop it into a public mailbox, feeling a sense of accomplishment. Mission accomplished. Except, your letter isn't quite going where you think it's going. Because somewhere, hidden away in a nondescript building, maybe even that building you just passed, lurks a team of skilled individuals, meticulously steaming open envelopes and copying their contents. They're the unseen eyes and ears of Napoleon Bonaparte, and they're operating within the infamous Cabinet Noir, or Black Cabinet. Think of it as the 19th century equivalent of, well, let's just say it rhymes with NSA. This isn't just some rogue operation, mind you. Postal surveillance was a well-established practice in Europe long before Napoleon came along. Rulers had been snooping on their subjects' correspondence for centuries, fearing sedition, conspiracies, and, worst of all, bad poetry. But Napoleon, ever the efficient autocrat, took it to a whole new level. He saw the Cabinet Noir as a crucial tool for maintaining power, controlling dissent, and, of course, getting the inside scoop on his enemies, both foreign and domestic. The man knew a thing or two about controlling narratives, after all, just look at the way he's always depicted on a rearing white stallion. I mean, he was notoriously short. He probably needed a stepladder to get up there. The operation was surprisingly sophisticated. The Cabinet Noir wasn't just a bunch of grumpy guys with letter openers. They employed skilled linguists, cryptographers, and even handwriting analysts. These weren't your run-of-the-mill eavesdroppers, they were professionals. Imagine the pressure of deciphering some terrible love sonnet while your boss, the emperor himself, is breathing down your neck. And the sheer volume of mail they intercepted was staggering. We're talking thousands upon thousands of letters every week. Everything from official diplomatic dispatches to mundane grocery lists was fair game. Can you imagine what they thought when they opened a letter that simply listed eggs, milk, bread, gunpowder? Awkward. So, what kind of information were they looking for? Well, primarily, anything that could threaten Napoleon's regime. They sought out evidence of plots, conspiracies, and even just general dissatisfaction with the emperor. Foreign agents were a particular target, of course. Imagine trying to conduct espionage when every letter you send is likely being read by someone else. Makes you appreciate encrypted emails, doesn't it? Now, you might be thinking, surely this was a secret. And, to a degree, it was. But the existence of the Cabinet Noir was a poorly kept secret, to say the least. People suspected their mail was being read. Some even adjusted their writing accordingly, using coded language, invisible ink, or simply avoiding sensitive topics altogether. It's like when you know someone is scrolling through your phone, and you start closing out all the embarrassing apps. Of course, the Cabinet Noir had its limitations. It was a labor-intensive operation, requiring a large staff and considerable resources. And even with the best cryptographers, some messages were simply unreadable. Plus, there was always the risk of being discovered, which could lead to a major scandal. And scandals there were. While the French government generally kept mum about the whole thing, similar operations were exposed in other countries, often with embarrassing consequences. Can you imagine the political fallout if it was discovered that your government was reading all your personal mail? Talk about a privacy violation. Historians still argue whether the Cabinet Noir was truly effective. Did it actually prevent conspiracies and help Napoleon maintain power, or was it simply a waste of resources that bred mistrust and resentment? The truth, as always, is probably somewhere in between. It likely provided some valuable intelligence, but it also created an atmosphere of paranoia and suspicion. One quirky detail. There are stories of the cabinet Noir employing people with unique skills. Like, for example, individuals who could reseal envelopes so perfectly that it was impossible to tell they had been opened. I mean, talk about a niche talent. That's the kind of thing you put on your resume right under, proficient in Microsoft Office. Beyond the potential impact on Napoleon's grip on power, this practice also had a chilling effect on the freedom of expression and the ability to organize politically. Knowing your letters could be read by the authorities, or even worse, misinterpreted, could certainly make you think twice about voicing dissent. It's a subtle but powerful form of control. Imagine writing a strongly worded letter to the editor, only to have it land on Napoleon's desk, accompanied by a note, possible subversive. Keep an eye on this one. It's also worth noting that the cabinet Noir wasn't just about catching criminals and spies. It was also about gathering information that could be used for political advantage. Knowing what your opponents were thinking, their strengths, and their weaknesses, was invaluable in the game of power. It's like reading your opponent's poker hand before they even place their bet. And the legacy of the cabinet Noir lived on long after Napoleon's fall. Postal surveillance continued to be practiced in various forms throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, often justified by national security concerns. In a way, the cabinet Noir laid the groundwork for the mass surveillance technologies we have today. Makes you think twice about what you type into Google, doesn't it? One interesting side note, sometimes, the information gleaned from intercepted letters had unintended consequences. There are stories of love affairs being exposed, business deals falling apart, and family feuds erupting, all thanks to the prying eyes of the cabinet Noir. It's like a reality TV show, but with real-life consequences and no commercial breaks. Mainstream historical fact for you, Napoleon established a vast network of secret police and informants to monitor public opinion and suppress dissent. The cabinet Noir was just one piece of this larger system of control. And here's something a little more, out there. Some conspiracy theorists believe that the cabinet Noir collected more than just political intelligence. They claim that the organization also gathered compromising information about prominent figures, which was then used for blackmail and manipulation. I mean, it wouldn't be a good conspiracy theory without a bit of blackmail, right? The open scholarly debate: to what extent did the cabinet Noir and similar surveillance practices contribute to the rise of modern totalitarian states? Did these early forms of surveillance normalize the idea of government intrusion into private lives, paving the way for more intrusive forms of control in the 20th century? That's something historians will likely be debating for years to come. You crumple up your draft letter in frustration. You can't possibly write what you truly feel, not with the threat of the cabinet Noir looming overhead. You think, maybe I'll just send a postcard with a picture of the Eiffel Tower. Safe, innocuous, and completely boring. And that, my friends, is the legacy of the cabinet Noir. It's a reminder that even in the age of digital encryption and VPNs, the tension between security and privacy remains as relevant as ever. It's also a reminder to think twice before you put anything in writing, because you never know who might be reading it. Now, if you'll excuse me, I think I'll go check my mailbox. Just to be sure. Alright, settle in, settle in. Let's dim the lights a little, maybe grab that weighted blanket. We're diving deep into the fascinating, surprisingly intense world of 19th century postal recruitment under, who else, Napoleon Bonaparte. You might think, postman. Really? What's so exciting about delivering mail? Trust me, this seemingly mundane aspect of empire building was, in Napoleon's eyes, absolutely crucial. And, honestly, who are we to argue with a guy who conquered most of Europe? You find yourself trudging along a dusty road, somewhere in France, circa 1806. You're not just some random traveler, you're a hopeful applicant, clutching a slightly sweaty letter of recommendation, headed to the local post office. The air is thick with the scent of, well, probably manure. Let's be honest, sanitation wasn't exactly a top priority back then. You wipe the grime from your brow, wondering if this whole joining the postal service thing is worth it. Is it really as stable and prestigious as everyone says? Napoleon certainly thought so. He understood that a reliable postal system wasn't just about delivering letters, it was about control. Information is power, after all, and in an empire stretching from Spain to Poland, keeping tabs on what people were saying and doing was paramount. Think of it as the 19th century equivalent of monitoring social media, but with less cat videos and more potential for treason. A key historical fact here is that Napoleon viewed the postal service as a vital instrument of state, essential for military communications, economic administration, and, of course, political surveillance. So, what made a good postman in Napoleon's eyes? Well, first and foremost, loyalty. Undying, unquestioning loyalty. Napoleon wasn't exactly a fan of dissent, and he needed people he could trust to handle sensitive information. He wanted individuals who wouldn't be swayed by whispers of rebellion or tempted by the allure of foreign gold. Historians still argue whether Napoleon's paranoia was justified or simply a product of his ambition, but one thing is clear, he demanded absolute fealty. Next up, efficiency. The Napoleonic postal system was all about speed and accuracy. Letters had to be delivered promptly, no excuses. Think of it like Amazon Prime, but with horses and carrier pigeons. You had to be able to navigate treacherous roads, brave inclement weather, and handle demanding schedules. No dawdling. If you were late, you were likely to face some serious consequences, and possibly a stern talking to from Napoleon himself. Okay, probably not, but the fear was real. Imagine you're finally face to face with the local postmaster, a stern-looking fellow with mutton chops that could rival a small dog. He quizzes you relentlessly on your knowledge of local geography, your ability to handle horses, and your general trustworthiness. He wants to know everything. Are you married? Do you have any debts? Have you ever been accused of sedition? Basically, are you going to be a liability? One quirky tidbit is that postmen were often exempt from certain taxes and military conscription. This made the job surprisingly desirable, particularly during times of war. It was a chance to serve the empire without having to, actually fight in the empire's endless wars. Plus, you got to wear a cool uniform. Who doesn't love a good uniform? And speaking of benefits, another advantage of being a postman was the access to information. You knew what was going on. You knew who was writing to whom, who was sending money where, and who was complaining about the emperor. This knowledge, of course, came with great responsibility. Woe betide the postman who used this information for personal gain, or worse, leaked it to the wrong people. Let's pause for a moment and consider the sheer scope of this operation. We're talking about a postal network that spanned thousands of miles, connecting major cities, remote villages, and sprawling military encampments. It was a logistical nightmare, requiring meticulous planning, careful coordination, and a whole lot of dedicated personnel. Napoleon understood this, and he invested heavily in the postal system, recognizing its importance to his overall strategy. You find yourself thinking, for a man who started a few wars, he actually cared about infrastructure. Historians still argue whether Napoleon's emphasis on centralized control ultimately benefited or hindered his empire. On the one hand, it allowed him to maintain a tight grip on power and respond quickly to threats. On the other hand, it stifled local initiative and created a climate of fear and suspicion. It's a classic case of the trade-offs between efficiency and freedom. A thought to think about while you're delivering the next letter, but try not to dwell on it too much. You don't want to look suspicious. You might be wondering, what were the actual qualifications for becoming a postman? It wasn't just about loyalty and efficiency, you also needed to be literate, numerate, and generally intelligent. You had to be able to read addresses, calculate postage rates, and keep accurate records. This wasn't just a job for anyone off the street. Napoleon wanted competent individuals who could handle the responsibilities of the position. But it wasn't all about intelligence. Physical endurance was also key. Postmen often had to travel long distances on foot or horseback, carrying heavy loads of mail. They had to be able to withstand extreme weather conditions and navigate difficult terrain. It was a demanding job that required stamina, resilience, and a healthy dose of stubbornness. Maybe you should have done more squats. And then there's the matter of secrecy. Postmen were entrusted with confidential information, and they were expected to keep it that way. They were forbidden from reading the mail, though, let's be honest, some probably did, and they were required to take oaths of secrecy. The penalties for violating this trust were severe, ranging from fines and imprisonment to, in some cases, dismissal and public shaming. Talk about performance pressure. Now, here's a bit of dark humor for you. One of the quirky things about the Napoleonic postal system was the use of cabines noires, or black chambers. These were secret rooms where postal officials intercepted and decrypted suspicious letters. Think of them as the NSA of the 19th century. The French government openly admitted to using these chambers. Imagine being the person who had to read everyone else's mail all day. Dear mother, I'm doing well. Oh, another love letter. I should have been a baker. What a bizarre job, right? I bet they had excellent handwriting, though. Of course, the existence of these black chambers was a closely guarded secret, and most people were unaware that their correspondence was being scrutinized. But the fear of being watched was always present, and it undoubtedly influenced people's behavior. A joke is, why did Napoleon always win at hide-and-seek? Because he had a secret black chamber. Historians still argue whether the use of black chambers was an effective security measure or a violation of privacy. On the one hand, it allowed the government to identify and thwart potential threats. On the other hand, it created a climate of distrust and undermined the very principles of freedom and liberty that Napoleon claimed to uphold. This is the thing about building an empire, you have to walk a very fine line between security and tyranny. So, you've navigated the interview with the postmaster, survived the grueling physical exam, apparently, you should have done more squats, and sworn your oath of loyalty. Congratulations, you're officially a Napoleonic postman. You're now part of a vast network that connects the empire, carrying messages of love, war, and everything in between. But remember, this is not just a job, it's a responsibility. You are a vital cog in the machine that keeps the empire running. You are a guardian of secrets, a messenger of hope, and a representative of the emperor himself. Don't let him down. And, maybe don't read the mail. Just a suggestion. Here's the last joke. What did the letter say to the stamp? Stick with me, we're going places. And just to round things out, and maybe quell a touch of potential insomnia with a final historical point. The French postal system under Napoleon was incredibly influential. It was a model for postal systems across Europe and even influenced the development of the postal service in the United States. So, the next time you drop a letter in the mailbox, remember that you're participating in a tradition that dates back to the Napoleonic era. Sleep tight, and don't let the bedbugs bite. Unless they're delivering the mail, of course. Okay, settle in, friend. Let's just, drift into a world where getting from point A to point B wasn't quite the teeth-rattling, bone-jarring ordeal it used to be. Think of it, you're setting out on a journey, right? Not a casual jaunt to the corner store, but a journey. We're talking days, weeks, maybe even months on the road. And that road, oh, that road. Before the improvements we're about to explore, let's just say those ancient pathways weren't exactly built for comfort. Imagine a track barely wider than your cart, choked with ruts deeper than your average existential crisis. Rain turned it into a mud bog that'd swallow a Roman legion, and dry weather just kicked up dust so thick you'd need a map to find your own nose. Lovely, isn't it? So, you trudge along, oxen straining, wheels groaning. Every bump sends a jolt straight through your spine and up to your teeth. You pray to whatever deity you fancy that your wagon doesn't decide to spontaneously disassemble itself halfway between towns. You see, a broken axle wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a potential invitation for bandits, wild animals, or just good old-fashioned starvation. You'd be stuck, and then, you'd be wishing you'd taken that desk job in the scriptorium, wouldn't you? But hold on. Hope dawns, because someone, somewhere, realized that this situation was less than ideal. That someone, or rather, many someones across various empires and eras, started to think about how to make travel a little less survivable. Let's consider the Romans, shall we? Those guys were obsessed with straight lines and conquering everything. And to do both, they needed good roads. Really, really good roads. They weren't just slapping some gravel down and calling it a day. No, these roads were engineered. Layers of stone, gravel, and paving were carefully laid down, often following the contours of the land while maintaining a relentlessly direct route. They were so well built that some of them are still around today. Imagine that. Built for legions marching across Gaul, now carrying tourists in rental cars. Isn't that something? One interesting little fact, Roman roads were often built with a slight camber, a gentle slope from the center to the edges. This allowed rainwater to drain off quickly, preventing the road from becoming a muddy quagmire. It's a simple design, but brilliant. And the milestone markers, milliarium, told you not only the distance but also sometimes boasted about the emperor's achievements. Essentially, ancient billboards funded by taxes. Now, I know what you're thinking. Okay, Romans. Great roads. But what about everywhere else? Well, you see similar improvements popping up across the world at different times. In the Incan Empire, for example, a vast network of roads called the Capac Nan stretched for thousands of miles along the Andes Mountains. These roads, often carved into the sides of cliffs, allowed for rapid communication and troop movement. The Incas didn't have the wheel, interestingly, but they were masters of engineering, using sophisticated techniques to build suspension bridges and retaining walls. Imagine hiking along those paths now. It's breathtaking, literally and figuratively. Of course, road improvements weren't just about military conquest or efficient administration. They were also crucial for trade. Think about the Silk Road, that sprawling network of routes that connected East Asia with Europe and the Middle East. While not a single, continuous road, it was a series of interconnected pathways that facilitated the exchange of goods, ideas, and, unfortunately, diseases. And those Silk Road merchants probably didn't have much to write home about as far as comfort goes. The roads weren't always made of stone. Sometimes they were simple dirt tracks that were maintained by local communities. In other cases, they were carefully paved with brick or wood. But regardless of the materials, the goal was always the same: to make travel faster, easier, and safer. Relatively speaking, of course. You weren't exactly going to be sipping lattes along the way. And speaking of faster, let's talk about the postal system. Because what good is a road if you can't use it to send cat pictures, important messages? Before you get all excited about carrier pigeons and scrolls, imagine a world without instant communication. If you wanted to send a message, you had to rely on someone physically carrying it. That someone might be a lone traveler, a merchant, or a specially trained messenger. The journey could take days, weeks, or even months, depending on the distance. And during that time, anything could happen. The messenger could be robbed, killed, or simply decide to take a detour to visit their auntie in the next village. Your message could be lost, delayed, or altered beyond recognition. It was basically the Dark Ages version of your email ending up in the spam folder. But again, necessity is the mother of invention, right? So, different cultures started developing more organized postal systems. In ancient Persia, the Angarium was a network of relay stations where messengers could change horses and resupply, allowing them to travel at breakneck speed. Okay, maybe not breakneck, but certainly faster than your average camel caravan. Similarly, the Romans had their cursus publicus, a state-run postal service that used a system of relay stations to deliver official messages and transport government officials. These stations were strategically located along major roads, providing fresh horses, food, and lodging. Think of it as the ancient Roman equivalent of a truck stop, except with togas instead of trucker hats. These relay systems were crucial for maintaining communication and control over vast empires. They allowed rulers to quickly send orders to their governors, receive reports from their generals, and keep tabs on what was happening in far-flung provinces. Without them, empires would have crumbled faster than a day-old croissant. Interestingly, some cultures even experimented with more innovative methods of communication. Legend has it that the Mongols used a system of signal fires to transmit messages across vast distances. By lighting fires on hilltops, they could quickly relay information about enemy movements or other important events. It was like a giant, smoky game of telephone, except with the potential to start a forest fire. Historians still argue whether the speed of these early postal systems has been exaggerated in historical accounts. It's tempting to imagine messengers galloping across the countryside at top speed, but the reality was probably a bit more pedestrian. Horses get tired, roads get rough, and messengers get distracted by roadside taverns. Still, these systems were a significant improvement over relying on chance encounters and word of mouth. Now, a quirky tidbit for you: the postal systems of the past weren't just about delivering messages. They also played a role in spreading news and information. Messengers often carried not just official documents but also personal letters, newspapers, and even gossip. They were basically the ancient equivalent of social media influencers, except with more lice and fewer selfies. But back to the infrastructure for a moment. Road improvements and relay systems weren't just about making travel faster and more efficient. They also had a profound impact on society. They facilitated trade, promoted cultural exchange, and strengthened political ties. They helped to create a more interconnected world, where people and ideas could move more freely. Of course, not everyone benefited equally from these improvements. The wealthy and powerful were the ones who could afford to travel in comfort and send messages quickly. The poor, on the other hand, often had to rely on their own 2 feet and whatever scraps of information they could glean from passing travelers. It's always been that way, hasn't it? Also, let's be honest here, sometimes, improvement is in the eye of the beholder. Sure, a well-paved road might make travel easier, but it could also disrupt local communities and displace people from their homes. Or it provided easy passage for invaders to get to your village. Progress, as they say, comes at a cost. Though I'm pretty sure most people would agree they'd rather take a well-paved road over a dirt path these days, especially if you are driving. But still, overall, the improvements to roads and postal relay systems were a significant step forward in human history. They laid the foundation for the modern transportation and communication networks that we take for granted today. So, next time you're stuck in traffic, take a moment to appreciate how far we've come. And maybe spare a thought for those poor souls who had to trudge through mud and dust, just to get a message from A to B. You think you have it bad? One last slightly naughty detail before we head into the pillow-soft land of sleep: in some parts of medieval Europe, travelers used to leave graffiti on the roads. Not spray-painted tags, but rather, carvings in the stone or markings on trees to indicate which way they had gone. Sometimes it was as simple as an arrow or an initial, but sometimes it was a bit more risque. Let's just say that some travelers had a rather colorful way of expressing themselves. Just imagine finding that today. You would probably post it on your socials, wouldn't you? So, there you have it. A gentle trot through the history of road improvements and postal relays. From Roman legions to Incan messengers, we've seen how people have strived to make travel a little less terrible. Now, close your eyes. Imagine the gentle rocking of a well-sprung carriage, the rhythmic clip-clop of horses' hooves, and the soft rustling of leaves in the wind. Sweet dreams. Maybe you'll dream of perfect roads. Or better yet, maybe you'll dream of teleportation. Wouldn't that be something? Alright, settle in, settle in. Let's dive into postal codes. Yes, you heard me right. Prepare to be mildly titillated by the story of how France got its act together when it came to delivering the mail. Imagine it, you trudge through the cobbled streets of 19th century Paris. The smell of freshly baked bread mingles with less pleasant aromas. It's a sensory experience, to say the least. But amidst all this chaos, a letter needs to find its way to Madame Du Bois on Rue de Rivoli. How? Well, before Napoleon, it was a bit of a free-for-all. Think of it like this, you're trying to explain to someone, who's never seen a map, how to get to your house using only landmarks and whispered rumors. That was essentially the 18th century postal system. You'd scribble a vague address, hoping the postman knew which Jean you meant amongst the teeming throngs of Jeans, and that he hadn't had too much vin rouge at lunch. Good luck with that. Now, Napoleon Bonaparte, a man not exactly known for his chill vibes, but certainly for his efficiency, decided this was simply unacceptable. He liked things organized. He liked things predictable. And he definitely liked knowing where his orders were going. After all, conquering Europe is a lot harder when your dispatch rider ends up in Dijon instead of Dusseldorf. So, what did he do? He started standardizing. He implemented stricter regulations on postal routes. He demanded more accurate record-keeping. He basically applied the same level of obsessive control to the mail as he did to his military campaigns. No detail was too small. The weight of envelopes, the size of stamps, the routes taken by the couriers, all subject to the emperor's iron will. One could almost say he had a postal complex. Get it? No. Fine, moving on. It's easy to imagine him pacing back and forth in his office, muttering about the inefficiencies of the ancien regime. Sacre bleu, he might have exclaimed, this postal system is a disgrace. It's slower than Josephine getting ready for a ball. This drive for order was part of a broader trend. The Napoleonic era saw a massive overhaul of French bureaucracy. It wasn't just about delivering letters, it was about establishing a centralized, efficient state. Napoleon created a system of prefects, essentially, regional governors, who were directly responsible to him. These prefects oversaw everything from tax collection to road maintenance, and yes, even the postal service. It was all about control. But here's a quirky little fact for you, while Napoleon was busy standardizing the postal system, he also heavily relied on carrier pigeons. Yep, those feathered friends were still a vital part of the communications network, especially for military intelligence. Imagine the scene, a soldier releasing a pigeon with a tiny message strapped to its leg, hoping it doesn't get lost or eaten by a hawk. High-tech, right? Historians still argue whether Napoleon's reforms were driven primarily by a desire for military dominance or by a genuine belief in the benefits of a modern, efficient state. Some argue he was simply a power-hungry autocrat who saw the postal system as another tool of control. Others claim he was a visionary leader who laid the foundations for modern France. The truth, as always, is probably somewhere in between. It seems he was just a bit particular. Now, let's fast forward a bit. While Napoleon's initial reforms laid the groundwork, the real postal code as we know it didn't emerge until much later. But his push for standardization paved the way. The need for a more precise system became increasingly apparent as cities grew and populations exploded. How do you deliver mail to a sprawling metropolis like Paris without a clear, organized system? The answer, my friends, is with great difficulty. The idea of using numbers to identify specific areas within a city or region wasn't entirely new. Some cities had experimented with rudimentary numbering systems for streets and buildings. But it wasn't until the 20th century that standardized postal codes began to appear in different parts of the world. And this is where things get interesting. Different countries adopted different approaches. Some opted for simple numerical codes, while others used alphanumeric combinations. The United States, for example, introduced its zip code system in the 1960s, promising faster and more efficient mail delivery. And, allegedly, a lower chance of mail ending up in the wrong state. Allegedly. But France? Well, France took its time. They were, after all, busy having revolutions and existential crises. The first true postal codes in France, known as Code Postal, were introduced in 1964. They initially consisted of 2 digits, representing the department, the administrative region, in which the address was located. Later, a 3-digit code was added to identify the specific post office or delivery area. So, if you lived in Paris, your postal code might start with 75, indicating the Department of Paris. And then, depending on which arrondissement you were in, the remaining digits would pinpoint your exact location. It was, in a word, revolutionary. Or, at least, mildly helpful in getting your bills delivered on time. Now, I know what you're thinking. This is all very interesting, you whisper, your voice barely audible above the gentle hum of the refrigerator, but what about the quirky stuff? The weird stories? The historical footnotes that make this all worthwhile? Well, fear not, my friends, because I have just the thing. Did you know that in some rural areas of France, the postman used to double as the village doctor? It's true. In the absence of regular medical services, the postman, often the only person who regularly traveled to remote hamlets, would provide basic medical advice and even dispense medication. He was like a walking, talking, letter-delivering, first aid kit. Talk about multitasking. And here's a little gem. In the early days of the postal service, there were strict rules about what you could send through the mail. Live animals, for example, were generally prohibited. But that didn't stop some people from trying to sneak them through anyway. There are documented cases of people attempting to mail chickens, cats, and even small pigs. I'm imagining a mailman opening a sack and being greeted by a chorus of oinks. The level of dedication. Historians still debate the long-term impact of postal codes on French society. Some argue that they contributed to greater social and economic equality by making it easier to access goods and services in remote areas. Others claim that they simply reinforced existing inequalities, benefiting urban centers at the expense of rural communities. And some have questioned whether the postal service truly improved at all, or if the number of lost packages remains constant. Whatever the truth, it seems we are stuck with the system. Think about it, you can now order almost anything online and have it delivered to your doorstep within days, sometimes even hours. That's the legacy of Napoleon's obsession with efficiency, and the countless postal workers who have sorted, stamped, and delivered our mail over the centuries. Next time you receive a package, take a moment to appreciate the long and winding road it took to get there. And maybe, just maybe, spare a thought for the poor postman who had to carry it all that way, dodging dog bites and navigating confusing street addresses. He's earned it. He really has. Alright, settle in, friend. Let's talk about getting messages really quickly back in the day, like, before email, before texts, even before reliably clear phone calls were a thing. We're diving deep into the world of military courier systems, beyond just your regular pigeon post, though we might circle back to the birds later. Imagine the stakes, a battle hinges on intelligence received now, or a treaty depends on a signed document arriving across continents before sunrise. The regular mail just wasn't going to cut it. You find yourself, let's say, a junior officer tasked with delivering crucial orders to a field commander. It's 1812. You're not exactly thrilled, you'd rather be back in the mess hall playing whist. You trudge down to the stables, the damp chill of the morning clinging to your greatcoat. The air smells of horses, manure, and a faint, metallic tang of weaponry being cleaned nearby. You mount a sturdy, if somewhat grumpy, looking gelding. This isn't just any ride to the next town. You are the message. You are the mission. You are, probably going to be very sore tomorrow. Think of these early systems as highly organized relays. The Roman Empire, for instance, understood the value of speedy communication. They developed a network of roads and posting stations where couriers could swap out tired horses for fresh ones. A Roman messenger could cover a surprising distance in a single day, traveling at a speed that would make your modern-day package delivery service blush with shame. Allegedly, they even had rudimentary forms of air mail messages attached to birds, but, you know, the success rate on that, questionable. The key was planning. Each stop was strategically placed, and the couriers were often trained athletes, skilled in horsemanship and endurance. They carried sealed documents, often bearing the emperor's signet ring to verify authenticity, and were under strict orders to protect the message at all costs. Lose the message, and you might as well lose your head, literally. Here's something a little more out there. Did you know some cultures use trained dogs to carry messages? Not your fluffy poodle, mind you, but strong, fast breeds capable of covering long distances. Imagine the dedication it takes to train a dog to reliably deliver a scroll, especially when squirrels are involved. The squirrels. It's frankly astonishing anyone ever managed it. Historians still argue whether the effectiveness of dog-based couriers was merely supplementary or played a crucial role in any serious military operation. Fast forward a few centuries and the concept remained essentially the same, though the empires and the technologies evolved. The Pony Express in the American West, while short-lived, captured the popular imagination. Young, daring riders, relaying mail across vast stretches of wilderness. It was romantic, dangerous, and significantly faster than stagecoach mail. Think of the grit, the raw determination, the unwavering commitment, all for the sake of getting that letter to Aunt Mildred on time. Okay, maybe the stakes were a bit higher than that. Land claims, political updates, the usual frontier drama. You can almost feel the rhythmic beat of the hooves pounding the dry earth as you're back in the saddle, pushing your horse onward. The sun is starting to climb, casting long shadows across the landscape. Your lips are cracked, dust cakes your teeth, and you're fairly certain you can taste horse sweat now. But you push on. The fate of, well, something important probably rests on your shoulders. Or rather, in that tightly sealed pouch strapped to your saddle. Now, let's leap ahead to the Victorian era. Steam power and the telegraph revolutionized communication, but the need for secure, physical delivery never entirely disappeared. Military intelligence agencies still relied on couriers to transport sensitive information that could not be risked over vulnerable telegraph lines. Spies meeting in dimly lit alleyways, exchanging coded messages, that sort of thing. You know, like in the movies. This is where things get a little bit more James Bond-ish. Couriers were trained in evasion techniques, equipped with disguises, and taught how to handle themselves in dangerous situations. Some even carried self-destruct devices to destroy their messages if capture was imminent. Imagine the tension, one wrong move, one slip of the tongue, and poof, top-secret information goes up in smoke, along with your career prospects. And the quirky tidbit? During the Crimean War, Florence Nightingale established a system of coded messages delivered by orderlies to overcome bureaucratic delays in getting supplies to the front. Orderlies. Talk about multitasking. And the code? Probably something like, "Send more bandages stat," and "Can someone please find me a decent cup of tea?" Historians still argue whether Nightingale's communication tactics truly impacted the survival rates, or if it simply provided much-needed moral support. Jumping to the 20th century, and things really get interesting. World War I saw the extensive use of motorcycles and airplanes for courier duties. The need for speed and reliability became paramount as communication networks were stretched to their limits. Imagine a young pilot, dodging enemy fire to deliver vital reconnaissance reports to headquarters. Not exactly an easy job, and the life expectancy wasn't exactly stellar, either. World War II took it to another level. Special Forces units like the British SAS and the American OSS relied heavily on couriers to maintain contact with resistance groups operating behind enemy lines. These were highly trained individuals, often fluent in multiple languages, skilled in unarmed combat, and capable of blending seamlessly into the local population. And the methods? Forget fancy gadgets. One trick was using hollowed-out coins or buttons to conceal microfilm messages. Can you imagine trying to swallow that if you were about to be captured? That's dedication, right there. One notable military technology, though, was the use of Navajo code talkers for secure communications in the Pacific Theater. Their language was so complex and unfamiliar to the Japanese that the code was never broken. Historians still debate whether the Navajo code talkers were really crucial to winning the war, or a useful but not vital component. Of course, you can't forget carrier pigeons. Throughout both world wars, pigeons played a vital role in delivering messages from the front lines, often navigating through heavy shelling and enemy fire. One pigeon, named Cher Ami, even received the French Croix de Guerre for her bravery in delivering a crucial message that saved the lives of nearly 200 American soldiers, despite being severely wounded. Turns out, that pigeon post wasn't so laughable after all. You wipe the sweat from your brow as you crest a small hill. The destination is in sight, a cluster of tents and wagons marking the field headquarters. You spur your horse to a final burst of speed, the pouch containing the vital orders slapping against your side. The journey has been long and arduous, but you've made it. You dismount, hand the pouch to a waiting officer, and collapse onto a nearby crate, utterly exhausted. But even with all the technological advancements of the modern era, the need for secure courier systems has not entirely disappeared. Think of diplomatic pouches, used to transport confidential documents between embassies. Or the use of armed guards to escort sensitive packages containing valuable information or equipment. In our modern, hyper-connected world, physical security remains a vital part of the communication chain. One fringe fact, the Swiss Guard, protectors of the Pope, still use a unique courier system to maintain communication between the Vatican and Swiss authorities. It's a blend of tradition and modernity, a reminder that even in the age of smartphones and encrypted emails, sometimes you just need to hand-deliver a message the old-fashioned way. Who knows, maybe they still occasionally use pigeons, too. You know, for old time's sake. And so, the next time you think about a package arriving a day late, remember the sacrifices and ingenuity of those who came before us, the dedicated couriers who risked their lives to deliver messages that shaped the course of history. Getting that Amazon package is impressive, but it's probably not saving lives, probably. You settle in, maybe adjust your blanket, extra points if it's Napoleonic themed, though I suspect those are surprisingly rare. Tonight, we're diving into the surprisingly vital role of the post office. Yes, really. Specifically, how a better postal system, of all things, fueled Napoleon's military machine. Imagine being Napoleon. You're trying to conquer Europe, a task significantly more demanding than, say, organizing your sock drawer. You've got armies scattered across vast distances, each with its own needs, quirks, and potentially disastrous tendencies to, get themselves captured. Communication is paramount. You can't just text your generals, BRB, invading Austria, or DM them battle plans on Instagram. Though, let's be honest, if he could have, he totally would have. Imagine Napoleon rocking a powdered wig and taking selfies with captured flags. The man was a natural showman. Before Napoleon, sending a message across France, let alone across Europe, was a logistical nightmare. It relied on a chaotic patchwork of private couriers, unreliable stagecoaches, and sheer luck. Imagine trying to coordinate a surprise attack when your message is 3 weeks late and delivered by a guy who also sells chickens on the side. Pretty ineffective, right? Information could easily get lost, intercepted, or simply delayed, leading to disastrous consequences on the battlefield. One of Napoleon's first moves, and perhaps one of his most underrated, was to overhaul the entire French postal system. He recognized that a streamlined and efficient communication network was as crucial to his war effort as gunpowder and bayonets. It's a little like realizing the Wi-Fi router is more important than the superpowered gaming PC if you're trying to win at Fortnite. You need to be able to send and receive information quickly and reliably. The postal reforms involved creating a centralized administration, standardizing routes, and establishing a network of postal relays. Essentially, Napoleon turned the French postal service into a well-oiled machine, a system designed to move information across the continent with unprecedented speed and efficiency. Messages traveled day and night, switching couriers at designated relay stations, ensuring that communications were delivered as fast as humanly possible. It's all rather like the Pony Express, but with less risk of getting shot by bandits and, hopefully, better snacks provided at the relay stations. Did they have little Napoleonic macarons? One can only dream. Now, you might be thinking, okay, faster mail, so what? How does that translate to winning battles? Well, consider this: precise timing is essential in warfare. Imagine trying to coordinate a flanking maneuver when you're not sure if the other army is even there yet. Or picture needing reinforcements but being unable to communicate your dire situation. Napoleon's improved postal system allowed him to issue orders, receive reports, and react to changing circumstances with remarkable speed. He could direct troop movements, manage supplies, and even counter enemy maneuvers in near real time, for the era, anyway. It was like having a modern-day command center, but instead of blinking computer screens, you're surrounded by a flurry of paper and stressed-out postal workers. Historians still argue whether Napoleon was a military genius, a lucky opportunist, or some combination of both. But there's no denying that his understanding of logistics, including the crucial role of communication, gave him a significant edge over his rivals. Other nations, still struggling with their creaky, antiquated postal systems, simply couldn't react as quickly or efficiently to Napoleon's moves. In essence, he weaponized the post office. And people say bureaucracy can't be exciting. Quirky tidbit time. Did you know that Napoleon employed a team of cryptographers dedicated to breaking enemy codes and ensuring the secrecy of his own messages? It was a vital part of his communication strategy. Imagine the pressure those guys were under. All right, Jean-Pierre, if you can't crack this code, we're all going to Moscow. No pressure. The impact extended beyond purely military matters. The improved postal system also played a crucial role in maintaining political control and consolidating power within the French Empire. Napoleon could communicate directly with his administrators in conquered territories, ensuring that his policies were implemented effectively. He could also monitor public opinion and quell dissent, using the postal service to disseminate propaganda and maintain order. It was like having a centralized social media platform, but with less cat videos and more thinly veiled threats of imprisonment. It also allowed for economic growth. The improved reliability and speed of mail facilitated trade and commerce, connecting different regions of the empire and boosting economic activity. Merchants could send invoices, track shipments, and communicate with their partners more efficiently, fostering a more integrated and prosperous economy. Basically, it was Amazon Prime for the 19th century, but with horses and quill pens instead of drones and computers. Can you imagine getting a notification? Your new copy of War and Peace is being delivered by a man named Gustav on horseback. ETA, March 5th days, weather permitting. The postal system also influenced the development of a French national identity. By connecting people across different regions, it fostered a sense of shared culture and common purpose. People could exchange letters, news, and ideas, creating a more unified and cohesive society. In a way, it was the original social network, connecting people not through likes and shares, but through handwritten letters and shared experiences. It's a nice thought, isn't it? All those handwritten letters, carefully crafted, sent out into the world, hoping to reach their destination. It makes you wonder how many love stories, family reunions, and political intrigues were facilitated by the humble postal service. However, it wasn't all sunshine and roses for the French postal workers. They faced numerous challenges, including poor road conditions, inclement weather, and the constant threat of bandits and enemy spies. Imagine being a postal courier during the Napoleonic Wars. You're riding across treacherous terrain, dodging enemy patrols, and trying to deliver vital messages while battling exhaustion and hunger. And all for a meager salary. It makes you appreciate the relative ease of modern-day delivery drivers. Except, they have to deal with angry customers and demanding algorithms. So maybe it's not that different after all. Napoleon's postal service also set a precedent for future postal systems around the world. Many countries adopted similar models, recognizing the importance of efficient communication for both military and civilian purposes. The standardized routes, centralized administration, and relay system became hallmarks of modern postal services, shaping the way we communicate to this day. So, the next time you drop a letter in the mailbox or receive a package, take a moment to appreciate the legacy of Napoleon and his surprisingly influential postal reforms. Of course, like any complex system, the Napoleonic postal service had its flaws. Censorship was rampant. The government regularly intercepted and read private correspondence to monitor dissent and gather intelligence. Imagine writing a love letter to your sweetheart only to have it read by a grumpy government official. It kind of takes the romance out of it, doesn't it? Maybe you'd start using code words. My dearest Antoinette, the cabbage is ripe for harvesting. Another issue was the sheer volume of mail generated by the Napoleonic Wars. The postal system was often overwhelmed, leading to delays and inefficiencies. Imagine trying to deliver thousands of letters a day with limited resources and a constant stream of new orders. It must have been a chaotic and stressful environment. Sort of like working in a modern-day call center, but with less ergonomic chairs and more existential dread. One fringe theory, and I stress fringe, suggests that Napoleon's obsession with communication extended into the realm of, well, let's just say advanced technology. Some speculate that he invested in experimental communication devices, perhaps even prototypes of early telegraphs, but that these efforts were ultimately unsuccessful. It's a fun idea, but there's little solid evidence to support it. It's more likely that he just had really good carrier pigeons. In the end, Napoleon's reliance on a robust postal system offers a valuable lesson about the importance of communication in warfare and governance. While battles are won with courage and strategy, they are also won with timely information and effective coordination. Napoleon understood this principle better than most, and his investment in the French postal service played a significant role in his rise to power and his military successes. It was a strategic advantage that helped him conquer much of Europe. And all thanks to the humble letter carrier. So next time you see your mailman, give them a wave. They're part of a long and surprisingly important historical tradition. And with that, I think it's time to drift off to dreamland, filled with images of Napoleon directing armies with a quill in one hand and a postage stamp in the other. Sweet dreams. Alright, settle in, friend. Let's talk about letters. Not just any letters, mind you, but the kind that transformed everyday life. Imagine a world where getting a message across town was a gamble, a dice roll of availability of unreliable messengers and exorbitant fees, all before the postal reforms, of course. You wake up in your modest apartment above your family's bakery. The smell of yeasty goodness wafts up the stairs, a constant, comforting aroma. Today, though, it's not just the promise of fresh bread that perks you up. You're expecting a letter. You trudge downstairs, the wooden steps creaking a familiar tune under your weight. The bakery is already buzzing. Your father, flour dusting his apron, is kneading dough with practiced ease. Your mother is arranging pastries in the window, each one a tiny masterpiece. And then you see it, lying on the counter amidst the day's orders, a letter. Addressed to you. Before these new postal systems, this would have been an occasion of considerable expense and stress. You see, before this, reliable communication wasn't really a thing, unless you were nobility, of course. Sending a letter was expensive, often unreliable, and sometimes downright dangerous. You relied on travelers, merchants, or even just a friendly acquaintance heading in the right direction. The cost was often borne by the recipient, and disputes over postage were common. Can you imagine having to haggle over the price of hearing news from your own family? It was wild. Some people even developed secret codes involving the way a letter was folded to convey hidden messages and save on postage, a sort of paper origami espionage. Historians still argue whether these codes were truly widespread or just a romanticized notion, but the idea is undeniably cool. But now, thanks to these new postal reforms, the postal system is, well, relatively reliable. Rates are standardized, and while it's not exactly overnight delivery, your letter arrived in a reasonable time frame. You pick it up, turning it over in your hands. The stamp is a new design, featuring the monarch's profile. You marvel at how far we've come, going from paying based on distance and weight to a simple, prepaid stamp. This stamp represents something more than just postage. It represents progress, connectivity, and a newfound sense of accessibility. You tear open the envelope with anticipation. It's from your cousin, Elara, who moved to the port city to open her own dress shop. You've been eagerly awaiting news of her venture. You settle into a chair in a quiet corner of the bakery, the scent of warm bread and the murmur of conversation fading into the background as you devour her words. Elara writes of the bustling docks, the exotic fabrics she's managed to acquire, and the success of her shop. She even includes a small sketch of one of her latest designs. You can almost feel the excitement radiating from the page. You smile, genuinely happy for her. Before the postal reforms, it would have taken weeks, perhaps even months, to receive this news. The sense of connection would have been diluted by the passage of time. But now, you feel like you're right there with her, sharing in her triumphs. This is the power of reliable communication. This is the revolution in civilian life that historians sometimes overlook, focusing instead on grand political movements and sweeping military campaigns. But the ability to easily and affordably communicate transforms society. And speaking of transformations, consider the impact on commerce. Your own family's bakery benefits directly. You now receive orders from neighboring villages, customers who previously found it too difficult to arrange for transportation and payment. You can order supplies from distant merchants with greater confidence, knowing that you can track your shipment and resolve any issues quickly. You see, it's all connected. You remember a time not long ago, and you're like, I can't even imagine this happening, by the way, because it's a real pain, but you remember writing a letter to a supplier about a damaged shipment of flour. Before the postal reforms, you would have had to rely on a passing merchant to carry the letter, and you'd have held your breath, hoping it would reach its destination safely. The wait for a response would have been agonizing, filled with uncertainty and anxiety. You would have felt utterly helpless. Now, the letter arrives promptly, and you receive a reply within days. The supplier apologizes for the error and promises to send a replacement shipment immediately. It's a small victory, but it highlights the importance of efficient communication in the day-to-day operations of your business. You breathe a sigh of relief. And here's a quirky fact: some postal workers, faced with the challenge of delivering mail across vast distances, would train pigeons to carry messages. These feathered messengers were surprisingly reliable, navigating using their innate homing instincts. One particularly famous pigeon, named Sher Ami, even managed to deliver a vital message during World War I, despite being severely wounded. Can you imagine relying on a pigeon for urgent correspondence? Talk about putting your faith in nature. Of course, the postal reforms weren't perfect. There were still instances of lost mail, delayed deliveries, and even outright fraud. But the improvements were undeniable. The volume of mail increased exponentially, connecting people and businesses in ways that were previously unimaginable. You finish reading Elara's letter and a wave of inspiration washes over you. You decide to write back immediately, sharing news of your family and your own aspirations for the bakery. You want to experiment with new recipes, using the exotic spices that are now more readily available thanks to increased trade. You envision a future where your bakery becomes a renowned establishment, attracting customers from far and wide. And you know what else this has opened up? Catalogs. Glorious, glorious catalogs. Before, if you wanted a new type of fabric, a fancy gadget, or even just a different kind of flour, you were limited to what was available in your local market. Now, catalogs from all over the country are delivered regularly, showcasing a dizzying array of goods. You can browse through the pages, dreaming of things you never knew existed. Yes, I know, I'm talking about pre-internet window shopping. Try to contain your excitement. This newfound access to goods also had a significant impact on fashion. People were no longer limited to the styles dictated by their local dressmakers. Catalogs showcased the latest trends from major cities, and people could order fabrics and patterns to create their own fashionable garments. This led to a greater sense of individuality and self-expression. It's easy to imagine our friend Alara would have benefited from such catalogs. But here's a slightly less glamorous, but equally important, outcome: the rise of standardized measurements. Before, you might order a yard of fabric from one merchant and find that it was significantly shorter than a yard from another. This made life incredibly difficult for businesses that relied on precise measurements. With the increased trade facilitated by the postal system, there was a growing need for standardization. And, of course, that meant businesses could now send payments securely, too. Before the postal system, sending money was a risky proposition. You could entrust it to a traveler, but there was always the chance of theft or loss. Now, you could send money orders through the mail, providing a much safer and more reliable way to pay for goods and services. This was a game changer for businesses, allowing them to expand their operations and reach new customers. Historians still argue whether these postal reforms were driven primarily by economic considerations or by a desire to improve communication and strengthen social bonds. The truth, as always, is likely a combination of both. But one thing is certain: the postal reforms transformed civilian life, creating a more interconnected, informed, and prosperous society. Now, imagine a world without this, where a handwritten letter, so important for the plot, for the characters, is just a lost cause. Alright, that's enough letter talk for one day. I hope you found that mildly interesting and vaguely soothing. Alright, settle in, settle in. Let's just continue, shall we? You trudge along the muddy track, the weight of the mail sack a dull ache across your shoulders. The sun beats down, relentless, but you can't stop. The mail must get through, right? That's what they tell you, anyway. The romantic ideal of the dedicated postman, braving all odds, and all that jazz. In reality, you're mostly just trying to avoid dysentery and hope you don't get mugged by highwaymen. Because let's be honest, the Wild West image of stagecoach robberies. That wasn't just a movie trope, folks. It was real. You can practically smell the dust kicked up by the hooves of a passing stagecoach. The aroma, oddly enough, is mixed with something vaguely floral. Lavender, maybe? You know, for all the grit and grime, even back then, people wanted a little, something extra. A little attempt to stave off the odors of the trail. You wonder if the passengers are carrying letters, maybe declarations of love, business deals, or even just news from home. All relying on you, and the rest of the postal service, to reach their destination. It's a heavy responsibility, even if your feet are heavier. Speaking of responsibility, let's not forget the inherent dangers of the job. It wasn't just bandits you had to worry about. Wild animals, treacherous terrain, and the ever-present threat of getting lost. And then, of course, there's the weather. Blistering heat in the summer, freezing cold in the winter. No paid time off for blizzards, friend. You deliver, or else. It's a wonder anyone signed up for the job. But people did, driven by a sense of duty, a need for employment, or maybe just a deep-seated love of walking. And then, adding insult to injury, after all that effort, you're probably getting paid peanuts. Not even enough to buy a decent pair of boots, let alone a comfortable place to sleep. You try not to dwell on it as you wipe the sweat from your brow. Instead, you focus on the next stop, the next letter, the next step. The American postal system, despite all its charm, has a surprisingly robust history. Back in the colonial days, Benjamin Franklin, yes, that Benjamin Franklin, was appointed Postmaster General. Can you imagine him sorting mail in his powdered wig? Anyway, he's credited with standardizing routes and improving efficiency, which, let's be real, was probably a low bar to clear at the time. But hey, baby steps, right? Historians still argue whether Franklin was truly a postal genius, or just happened to be a pretty competent guy in a position to make improvements. Some argue he was a visionary who laid the groundwork for a national communication network, while others see him as simply a product of his time, implementing fairly obvious solutions. Personally, you think he probably just liked stamps. Who doesn't, right? Wait, do you like stamps? Am I the only one who likes stamps? This is more awkward than when you get a package that's clearly been opened and resealed with cheap tape. But even with Franklin's supposed genius, the Postal Service was plagued with problems from the very beginning. Delays were rampant, theft was common, and corruption. Oh, don't even get you started on corruption. You know, the kind where people were misplacing important documents in exchange for, say, a generous donation to their favorite tavern fund. You remember hearing about a particular incident involving a shipment of gold coins that mysteriously vanished somewhere between Philadelphia and New York. The authorities investigated, of course, but the gold was never recovered. It said that it's still buried somewhere along the old post road, waiting to be discovered. So, you know, if you're ever bored and have a metal detector, you know what to do. Don't tell anyone I told you that, okay? Of course, the theft wasn't always about financial gain. Sometimes, it was about more personal matters. Like, say, a jealous husband intercepting a love letter intended for his wife. Or a politician trying to bury scandalous rumors before they reached the public. The Postal Service, you see, was a powerful tool. And like any powerful tool, it could be used for good, or for less good. And then there's the sheer logistical nightmare of transporting mail across vast distances. Imagine trying to coordinate stagecoaches, horseback riders, and even pigeon post, yes, that was a thing, across hundreds of miles of undeveloped land. It's a recipe for chaos, delays, and a whole lot of lost letters. You're pretty sure some of those letters are still stuck in some tree somewhere. Speaking of pigeons, there was this one story you heard about a particularly persistent pigeon named Cher Ami during World War I. Apparently, this bird managed to deliver a crucial message that saved the lives of hundreds of soldiers, despite being shot and seriously wounded. Now, that's dedication. Though I guess you could say it's the least they can do after they've been pooping all over everything since 1914. It certainly puts your own complaints about aching feet into perspective, doesn't it? You pause to adjust your sack, the leather creaking under the weight. The sun is starting to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape. You can almost feel the cool evening air beginning to settle in. Time to find a place to rest for the night. Hopefully, somewhere with a roof. You don't fancy sleeping under the stars tonight, not after that close encounter with that thing you saw dart across the road earlier. Historians still debate whether the early postal service was more efficient than its reputation suggests. Some argue that the widespread complaints about delays and losses were simply a reflection of the era, when communication was inherently unreliable. Others point to the numerous documented cases of corruption and mismanagement as evidence of systemic problems. Either way, it's safe to say that the Postal Service wasn't exactly running like a Swiss watch. More like a sundial that only works on sunny days. And the corruption, the petty theft, the occasional outright robbery, it all took its toll. On the postal workers, on the businesses that relied on the mail, and on the public's trust in the system. It created a climate of cynicism and suspicion, where everyone was assumed to be on the take. You can see it in the weary faces of your fellow postmen, the resigned shrugs of the merchants, and the muttered complaints of the customers. You think to yourself, things couldn't possibly get worse. Just as you do, you come across a riderless horse, its saddle empty. You slowly get the sinking feeling that this wasn't simply an accident. Despite all the challenges, the Postal Service somehow managed to survive and even, dare you say, thrive. It became an essential part of American life, connecting communities, facilitating commerce, and providing a vital link to the outside world. It wasn't perfect, not by a long shot, but it was necessary. And for all its flaws, it represented something important, the promise of communication, the hope of connection, and the belief that even in the vast and often unforgiving wilderness, people could still reach out to one another. You continue your trek, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The weight of the mail sack feels a little lighter now, not because it actually is, but because you are choosing to focus on the good it represents. The letters, the packages, the newspapers, they're not just objects, they're connections. And in a world that can often feel isolating and chaotic, those connections matter more than ever. Though the nagging feeling about that empty horse is getting stronger. You briefly think you hear the sound of rustling leaves, but you can't be sure. Hopefully you will reach the next town and get off this road for a bit. It's a thankless job, being a postman, and I salute those who came before and made something of what we have today. You really are the best. Alright, that's it for now. Let's take a break. You probably need one. And so do I. You go get some rest and I'll be here. Ready for the next leg of the journey. Until then, just breathe. Alright, settle in, friend. Let's keep this train rolling, shall we? Choo-choo, metaphorical train, of course. No actual locomotives are involved, yet. You trudge along the dusty road, the midday sun beating down on your neck. The year is, well, a year in the mid-19th century. Let's say 1848. Why 1848? Because it sounds nice and historical. Plus, there's that whole year of revolutions thing happening in Europe. Exciting times. But for you, right now, life feels less like a revolution and more like a particularly boring Tuesday. You squint, wiping the sweat from your brow. The air smells of horses, manure, and the faint, underlying scent of ambition. Yes, even smells can have ambition. Especially in this era. You're on your way to, let's say you're visiting your Aunt Mildred. Aunt Mildred lives in a town about a day's ride away, a town so small it probably doesn't even have its own gossip column. Just endless fields of wheat and the general ennui of rural life. As you walk, you notice something new. Something odd. Poles, tall and slender, marching across the landscape like an army of strangely polite giants. Wires are strung between them, shimmering faintly in the sunlight. You pause, tilting your head. What incarnation are those? Well, my friend, you're looking at the future. You're looking at the telegraph. You see, up until now, communication was slow. Really slow. If you wanted to send a message, you had to write a letter, find someone willing to carry it, for a price, naturally, and then wait. And wait. And wait some more. News traveled at the speed of a horse or a ship, which, let's be honest, is not exactly zippy when you're waiting to hear if your investments in Peruvian guano are paying off. But the telegraph? The telegraph promised to change all that. It promised to send messages instantly. Well, almost instantly. Faster than a horse, anyway. Which, let's be fair, is setting the bar pretty low. Even a particularly lethargic snail could probably outpace a letter being carried by horseback over a particularly arduous mountain pass. The basic idea is pretty simple, even a little elegant. I use the word elegant loosely, because, well, it involves wires and batteries. Not exactly haute couture. You have a sender, they tap out a message using a special code, Morse code, named after Samuel Morse, the guy most often credited with inventing the American version of the thing. These taps send electrical signals down the wire to a receiver, who then decodes the message. Bam! Instant communication. Or, relatively instant. Historians still argue whether Morse should get all the credit, of course. There were other inventors fiddling with similar ideas around the same time, particularly in Europe. Some even argue that Morse was more of a savvy businessman and promoter than a brilliant inventor, relying heavily on the work of others. But hey, that's how history often works, right? The squeaky wheel gets the grease, or in this case, the patent. But let's get back to you and your Aunt Mildred. As you continue your walk, you see a small building next to one of these telegraph poles. A sign hangs above the door, "Telegraph Office." Curiosity piqued, and frankly, anything is more interesting than walking to Aunt Mildred's, you decide to investigate. Inside, you find a man with a meticulously groomed mustache and a slightly harried expression. He's surrounded by wires, batteries, and a strange clicking machine. This, my friend, is your local telegraph operator. He's basically the 19th century equivalent of an IT guy. Except instead of fixing your printer, he's responsible for connecting you to the entire world, well, the parts of the world that have telegraph lines, anyway. You ask him what all the fuss is about. He explains, with a patient sigh, clearly, he gets this question a lot, that the telegraph is going to revolutionize communication. Businesses will be able to coordinate operations across vast distances. Newspapers will be able to report news from far-off lands in a matter of hours. Lovers separated by oceans will be able to exchange messages almost instantly. It's going to change everything. He probably says all this in a very serious, slightly pompous voice, too. People in the 19th century were very good at being serious and pompous. It was practically a national pastime. You listen politely, trying to look impressed. Honestly, it all sounds a bit far-fetched. I mean, instant communication. Seems like something out of a science fiction novel. Which, of course, didn't exist yet in quite the way we think of it today. Jules Verne was around, but we hadn't quite reached the era of dystopian tech gone wrong narratives just yet. You're more concerned with whether Aunt Mildred will have baked her famous, or infamous, depending on your perspective, gooseberry pie. But the telegraph operator is undeterred. He's a believer. He sees the potential. He probably even dreams in Morse code. He then tells you a quirky tidbit, something that isn't exactly common knowledge. Did you know that some early telegraph lines were actually used to transmit time signals? Railroads, in particular, used these signals to synchronize their clocks, preventing collisions and ensuring trains ran on time. Before this, local time varied from town to town, which made scheduling a logistical nightmare. Think about that for a second. The telegraph didn't just speed up communication, it helped standardize time itself. Pretty mind-blowing, right? Of course, the telegraph wasn't all sunshine and roses. It had its downsides. For one thing, it was expensive. Sending a telegram could cost a considerable amount of money, making it inaccessible to the average person. It was more for businesses, governments, and the wealthy elite. So, if you were hoping to send Aunt Mildred a quick, "Be there soon. Pie better be good," message, you were probably out of luck. Stick to walking. Also, the telegraph relied on a network of wires that were vulnerable to damage and disruption. Storms, accidents, even just mischievous squirrels could knock out the lines, cutting off communication. Imagine the frustration of waiting anxiously for news, only to discover that a particularly ambitious rodent had chewed through the wire. Suddenly, that horse doesn't seem so slow after all. But, despite these drawbacks, the telegraph spread like wildfire. Within a few decades, telegraph lines crisscrossed continents, connecting people and places in ways that were previously unimaginable. It shrunk the world, making it feel smaller and more interconnected. News traveled faster, businesses operated more efficiently, and governments could exert greater control over their territories. And that harried-looking telegraph operator? He became a key figure in society, a gatekeeper of information. He was the one who translated your messages, who connected you to the wider world. He was the 19th century equivalent of your internet service provider, except with a much better mustache. He was a crucial linchpin between senders and receivers. To get information across great distances, you needed his approval and expertise. You thanked the operator for his explanation, trying to maintain a semblance of interest. Secretly, you're still skeptical. This whole instant communication thing seems a bit too good to be true. But as you step back out onto the road, you can't help but feel a sense of anticipation. Something is changing. The world is changing. And you, my friend, are witnessing it firsthand. And so, you continue your walk to Aunt Mildred's, the image of those telegraph poles and wires etched in your mind. You wonder what the future holds. Will this telegraph thing really take off? Will it change the way people live and work? Will Aunt Mildred ever learn to make a decent pie? Only time will tell. But one thing is for sure, the world will never be quite the same. One final thought before you continue your journey: the telegraph also had a surprising impact on journalism. Before the telegraph, news articles were often long and flowery, filled with elaborate prose and subjective opinions. But the telegraph demanded brevity. Every word cost money, so journalists had to learn to be concise and to the point. This led to the development of a more objective, fact-based style of reporting that we still see today. So, next time you read a news article, remember the humble telegraph. It played a role in shaping the way we consume information. And, of course, a light joke to see us off. What did the telegraph say to the telephone? "Stop ringing me, I'm wired." On you go then. Still a ways to walk, I'm afraid. Hopefully Aunt Mildred's pie is worth it. Okay, settle in, friend. Let's delve into the surprisingly thrilling world of postal reform. I know, sounds about as exciting as watching paint dry. But trust me, there's a real, tangible legacy here, a lasting, postal footprint left by none other than Napoleon Bonaparte. You might picture Napoleon as just a short guy on a horse, conquering Europe and wearing a funny hat. And, well, you wouldn't be entirely wrong. But amidst all the battles and empire building, he was also a surprisingly savvy administrator, and he recognized the importance of efficient communication. Imagine trying to run an empire when your messages take weeks, if not months, to reach their destination. It's like trying to coordinate a surprise birthday party by carrier pigeon. Disaster. So, you're Napoleon, fresh off another victory, probably, and you realize your postal system is, well, let's just say it's not exactly cutting edge. It's a mishmash of private couriers, state-run services, and a whole lot of inefficiency. Things are getting lost in transit, letters are taking forever, and frankly, it's all a bit of a mess. Time for an overhaul. You crack your knuckles and get to work. You streamline the existing postal routes, establish new ones, and create a more standardized system for delivery. You implement a system of postmarks to track letters and ensure accountability. Think of it as the 19th century version of tracking your Amazon package. Except instead of getting instant updates on your phone, you're relying on a guy on horseback and a vague hope that your letter arrives sometime before the next ice age. One of the key changes you introduce is the establishment of a more centralized administration for the postal service. You create a dedicated postal authority, responsible for overseeing all aspects of mail delivery. You're basically building the French version of the USPS, only with way more powdered wigs and significantly less complaining about stamp prices. In fact, Napoleon himself was a notorious micromanager when it came to the post, even dictating the placement of post offices and inspecting mail coaches, which, given his other pursuits, seems like a really odd thing to obsess over. The speed and reliability of the French postal service under Napoleon significantly improved. Now, orders and information could be disseminated more rapidly across France and its conquered territories. Historians still argue whether Napoleon's obsession with efficiency stemmed from a genuine desire to improve the lives of his citizens, or a paranoid need to control every aspect of his empire, including their correspondence. But, whatever his motivations, the impact was undeniable. You are a merchant in Bordeaux, finally receiving that crucial shipment order from Paris weeks faster than before. You can respond quickly, get those goods on their way, and keep your business booming. You are a general on the front lines, getting vital strategic information in time to actually use it. And, you're just an average citizen, able to communicate with loved ones across the country without waiting an eternity for a reply. It's a postal revolution. Napoleon's postal reforms also had a significant impact on the development of postal services in other countries. As France conquered and occupied vast swathes of Europe, its postal system became a model for other nations. Many countries adopted similar systems, streamlining their own postal services and improving communication across their territories. But it wasn't all smooth sailing, of course. One quirky fact is that Napoleon's postal service was also used for surveillance. He authorized the interception and reading of private letters, particularly those of suspected political opponents. Basically, if you were plotting against Napoleon, chances are, he knew about it before you even finished writing it down. Talk about a read receipt. This practice, while ethically dubious, highlights the power and control that Napoleon wielded over communication. You're a suspected spy, carefully crafting your coded message, only to realize that the postmaster is probably deciphering it over his morning croissant. Maybe carrier pigeons weren't so bad after all. Beyond government and espionage, the postal reforms inadvertently contributed to the rise of a more connected society. As communication became easier and more reliable, people were able to stay in touch with friends and family, conduct business across greater distances, and access information more readily. The postal service became a vital artery of society, connecting people and places in ways that had never been possible before. So, in a way, Napoleon, the guy who thought he was going to conquer the world, accidentally became the guy who conquered snail mail. Now, you might be thinking, okay, great, the mail got a little faster. Big deal. But the impact of these reforms extended far beyond just speedier delivery. The standardized postal rates, the improved infrastructure, and the increased accessibility to communication all contributed to the development of a more modern and connected world. It laid the groundwork for the postal systems we rely on today. You're sitting at your desk, firing off emails, ordering packages online, and chatting with friends across the globe. You might not realize it, but you're benefiting from the legacy of Napoleon's postal reforms. Okay, maybe not directly benefiting, but he helped get the ball rolling. And that deserves some credit, doesn't it? Another interesting, albeit somewhat morbid, aspect of Napoleon's postal legacy is the role it played in disseminating news of battles and casualties. Imagine the anxiety of waiting for news from the front lines, hoping against hope that your loved one was still alive and well. The postal service, while bringing news of victory, also carried the heavy burden of grief and loss. It was a double-edged sword, connecting people to the world, but also bringing them face to face with the harsh realities of war. You are a mother in a small village, dreading the arrival of the postman, knowing that he could be carrying the news you desperately fear. It's a stark reminder that even the most efficient communication systems can be carriers of pain. The reforms were not without their critics, though. Some argued that the centralized postal authority gave the government too much control over communication, potentially stifling dissent and limiting freedom of expression. Others complained about the cost of the reforms, arguing that the money could have been better spent on other priorities. You're a disgruntled taxpayer, grumbling about the wasteful spending on new post offices and fancy uniforms for postal workers. Why can't they just deliver the mail like they used to, you mutter. Sounds familiar, right? Historians still debate the extent to which Napoleon's postal reforms were a positive or negative development for France. Some argue that they were essential for the functioning of the empire and the development of a modern economy. Others contend that they were primarily a tool for political control and surveillance, undermining civil liberties. The truth, as always, probably lies somewhere in between. One fringe theory suggests that Napoleon actually used the postal service to disseminate propaganda and manipulate public opinion. The idea is that he carefully controlled the flow of information, ensuring that only news favorable to his regime reached the public. It's a conspiracy theory, sure, but given his propensity for control, it's not entirely outside the realm of possibility. You are a cynical journalist, secretly convinced that all the positive news stories about Napoleon are being carefully crafted and distributed by the postal service. Propaganda by post, you mutter, scribbling furiously in your notebook. Regardless of the controversies, Napoleon's postal reforms left an indelible mark on France and the world. They transformed the way people communicated, facilitated the growth of commerce, and contributed to the development of more connected societies. So, the next time you drop a letter in the mailbox or track a package online, take a moment to appreciate the legacy of the short guy on a horse who, in his own way, helped shape the modern world. And maybe, just maybe, raise a glass to the unsung heroes of the Postal Service, the guys and gals who brave the elements to deliver your mail, rain or shine. Just don't try to intercept their mailbags. That's probably still illegal. And definitely frowned upon. Although, imagine the stories they must hold. And one last quirky thing, apparently, Napoleon was obsessed with ensuring the smell of the Postal Service was up to par. He reportedly complained about the stench of damp paper and stale ink and ordered the use of fragrant oils and perfumes in post offices. So, not only did he revolutionize communication, but he also tried to make sure your letters smelled nice. What a guy. Alright, settle in, friend. Let's dive deep, real deep, into the surprisingly captivating world of Napoleonic postage. Think of it like a sleep story, but with more bureaucracy and fewer cuddly animals. Not zero cuddly animals, mind you. We'll get there. You're going to love this. Picture this, you're a messenger, back in the early 1800s. Not exactly a glamorous gig. Forget those romanticized images of dashing riders on horseback. More often, you're trudging down muddy roads, your shoes soaked through, clutching a pouch full of letters that could literally make or break someone's fortunes. The fate of empires, or at least someone's inheritance, rests in your clammy hands. And your feet are killing you. You're also probably hungry. And possibly dodging the occasional rogue pig. Ah, the joys of pre-industrial travel. Now, you might think that delivering messages for Napoleon's empire would come with certain perks, maybe priority roads or a personal chef whipping up gourmet meals. Nope. You're just another cog in the machine, a vital cog, sure, but a cog nonetheless. One of the biggest challenges you face is the sheer volume of mail. Napoleon, as you probably know, was a prolific letter writer. He corresponded constantly with his generals, his ministers, his lovers, especially Josephine, and even just, people. This meant a lot of correspondence flowing back and forth across Europe, all needing to be sorted, transported, and delivered with relative speed. Relative being the operative word here. Compared to the Pony Express, we're talking snails. The French postal system, at its core, was based on a system of relays, just like the Romans before them. You'd carry your pouch to the next designated post house, exchange it for a fresh pouch headed in the opposite direction, maybe grab a quick bite of stale bread, if you were lucky, and then trudge back to your starting point. The system sounds straightforward, but the devil was in the details. Imagine coordinating all of that across vast distances, with varying road conditions, unpredictable weather, and the constant threat of bandits or, those aforementioned rogue pigs. And speaking of details, did you know that the French postal system was one of the first to standardize postage rates based on distance and weight? It wasn't free, like complaining on Twitter. Before this, postage was often negotiated on a case-by-case basis, which was a huge pain. Now, you could at least estimate how much it would cost to send a letter from Paris to, say, Berlin. Of course, the actual cost could still vary depending on who was doing the estimating, but hey, progress is progress, right? Also, it was the receiver, not the sender, who paid, which you can imagine created some awkward conversations. Now, here's a slightly quirky fact for you. In some parts of Europe, carrier pigeons were still used alongside the official postal system. This wasn't necessarily sanctioned by the government, but people being people, they found ways to get messages across that were faster, or more discreet, than the official channels. Think of it as the 19th century equivalent of using a burner phone. Only, with feathers. Historians still argue whether the use of carrier pigeons represented a serious challenge to the state's control over communication, or just a charming little loophole. I like to think of them as little feathered spies, flitting across borders with secret messages tied to their tiny legs. So cute. But back to our weary messenger. Let's say you're carrying a particularly important letter, perhaps a dispatch from Napoleon himself. You might think you'd get some kind of special protection, like an armed escort. But no. You're still just you, with your muddy shoes and your pouch of potentially world-altering information. Your best bet is to be inconspicuous, to blend in with the scenery, to avoid attracting unwanted attention. Which, if you're covered in mud and look utterly exhausted, you're probably doing a pretty good job of already. The real security came from the system itself. The constant flow of messengers, the network of post houses, the sheer volume of correspondence, all of this made it difficult for anyone to intercept a particular letter without attracting attention. It was like trying to find a specific grain of sand on a very large beach. A very muddy beach. With lots of pigeons flying overhead. And of course, there were also postal inspectors, whose job it was to keep an eye on things, to ensure that the system was running smoothly, and to catch anyone who might be trying to tamper with the mail. Think of them as the Internal Affairs Division of the Napoleonic Postal Service. I bet their days were never boring. Actually, I take that back. They were probably incredibly boring. Unless they caught a rogue pigeon smuggler. Now that would be a story. But even the best security measures couldn't prevent all problems. Theft, delays, misdeliveries, these were all part of the daily reality of the Napoleonic postal system. A letter might go missing for weeks, only to turn up months later in a completely different location. Or it might never turn up at all. Which, if you were waiting for an important inheritance, could be a major bummer. Or, conversely, if you were hoping to avoid paying a debt, a minor victory. You can't have everything. Here's a fun little anecdote. There's a story, probably apocryphal, about a postal worker who accidentally swapped two nearly identical letters, each containing instructions about the movement of troops. The resulting confusion led to a minor skirmish between two French regiments, who ended up firing on each other in the dark. Talk about a postal screw-up. Historians still debate the veracity of this story, but it's a perfect illustration of the potential consequences of even the smallest mistake in the postal system. Imagine being that postal worker. You'd probably want to change your name and move to a different country. Maybe become a shepherd. One thing you might not realize is the importance of the postal system for spreading propaganda. Napoleon was a master of public relations, and he used the postal service to disseminate his message throughout his empire. Newspapers, pamphlets, official pronouncements, all of these were distributed through the mail, helping to shape public opinion and maintain support for his regime. In a way, the Napoleonic postal system was a precursor to the modern internet, a tool for controlling the flow of information and influencing the hearts and minds of the people. But with, way more horses. And just like the internet, the Napoleonic postal system wasn't immune to censorship. Letters were routinely opened and read by government officials, looking for signs of dissent or sedition. If you wrote anything that was considered critical of Napoleon, you could find yourself in serious trouble. So, you had to be careful what you wrote. Think before you ink, as they say. Or, think before you dip your quill. Despite its flaws, the Napoleonic postal system was a vital part of his empire. It allowed him to communicate with his armies, to administer his territories, and to maintain control over a vast and diverse population. It was a complex and often chaotic system, but it worked. Well, mostly. And that's all the time we have for today, friend. I hope you found this little journey into the world of Napoleonic postage enlightening. And maybe even a little bit relaxing. Now, close your eyes, breathe deeply, and imagine yourself back on that muddy road, carrying a pouch full of secrets. Sweet dreams, or at least, dreams free from rogue pigs. Alright, settle in, settle in. You trudge up the driveway, the gravel crunching softly under your shoes. The day is finally done, the sun dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and, is that mauve? Ha! Artistic choice, Mother Nature. You've got that familiar end-of-day drag, that feeling like you're moving through molasses. We've all been there. You reach the mailbox, that faithful sentinel guarding your well, mostly bills and junk mail. Still, there's always that little spark of hope, isn't there? Maybe today's the day you win the lottery. Or get a handwritten letter from a long-lost relative telling you about their hidden fortune. Okay, probably not, but a person can dream, right? You flip open the mailbox door, a satisfying clunk, and peer inside. Yep, a delightful mix of advertisements promising miracle weight loss, credit card offers you definitely don't need, and, wait, what's this? A small, unassuming envelope with no return address. Intriguing. You pull out the mail, sifting through the usual suspects. You know, the kind of stuff that fuels those fantasies about moving to a remote island and living off coconuts and the sheer force of your will. The mystery envelope sits on top, practically begging to be opened. Before diving in, though, let's appreciate the humble mailbox itself. Did you know that standardized mailboxes, as we know them, really only took off in the late 19th century? Before that, people either picked up their mail at the post office or relied on private delivery services. Talk about inconvenient. Imagine having to trek down to the local post office every day just to see if your Amazon package has arrived. The horror. Speaking of history, you might find it odd that mailboxes are traditionally blue in the United States. The Postal Service switched from red, white, and blue boxes in 1971 to simplify painting and maintenance. It's true. And here's a quirky tidbit for you: in some rural areas, particularly in the American West, people still use creatively decorated or even custom-built mailboxes to express their individuality. We're talking full-on miniature cowboy saloons, painted cows, and even the occasional mailbox shaped like a fish. It's basically the front yard version of a bumper sticker. Historians still argue whether the shift to centralized mail delivery was a deliberate attempt to control the flow of information or simply a matter of efficiency. Personally, I suspect it was probably a bit of both. Governments do love to keep tabs on things, don't they? Now, back to that mysterious envelope. You tear it open with a satisfying rip, okay, maybe that was a little too enthusiastic, and pull out the contents. It's a single sheet of paper, folded neatly in thirds. You unfold it carefully, and it's a map. A hand-drawn map, complete with little landmarks and cryptic symbols. What is this, some kind of elaborate treasure hunt? You scan the map, trying to decipher its secrets. It looks vaguely familiar, like a place you've seen before, but you can't quite place it. Is it a local park? A hiking trail? Or maybe, a secret underground lair filled with, what? Gold? Lost artifacts? Talking squirrels? Okay, maybe not talking squirrels. As you study the map, you notice a small inscription in the corner. It's a single word, written in elegant cursive: remember. Remember what? Remember where? The questions swirl in your mind, adding another layer of mystery to the already perplexing puzzle. You're starting to feel a bit like Indiana Jones, except instead of a fedora and a whip, you've got, well, your pajamas and a cup of lukewarm tea. Not quite as glamorous, but the adventure is still there, simmering beneath the surface. You glance around, half expecting a shadowy figure to emerge from the bushes, demanding the map at gunpoint. But no, just the gentle chirping of crickets and the distant hum of traffic. Still, you can't shake the feeling that you're onto something big. Or maybe you're just really tired and your imagination is running wild. It's been a long day, after all. You decide to take the map inside, promising yourself that you'll decipher its secrets tomorrow. For now, it's time to relax, unwind, and let the day's stresses melt away. You toss the junk mail in the recycling bin, good for you, being environmentally conscious. And head towards the house, the mysterious map tucked safely in your pocket. As you walk, you can't help but wonder about the person who sent the map. Who are they? What do they want you to remember? And most importantly, is there actual treasure involved? You chuckle to yourself. Probably not. But hey, a little mystery never hurt anyone, right? Unless, of course, it leads you into a booby-trapped cave filled with venomous spiders. But let's not dwell on that. Oh. Before you get completely lost in thought about treasure maps and hidden lairs, did you know that Ben Franklin served as the first Postmaster General of the United States? He implemented many reforms to improve the efficiency and reliability of mail delivery, including setting up regular postal routes and standardizing postage rates. A true visionary. You are probably not aware of the fact that the U.S. Postal Service actually tried to deliver packages by carrier pigeon in the late 19th century. It didn't work out so well, as the pigeons were prone to getting distracted, lost, or eaten by hawks. But hey, points for creativity. Historians still argue whether the rise of the internet has rendered the postal service obsolete or whether it will continue to play a vital role in our society. Considering the number of Amazon packages that show up on my doorstep every week, I'm leaning towards the latter. Now, you're inside, slipping off your shoes and kicking back on the couch. Ah, that's the spot. You bury yourself in the cushions, a wave of relaxation washing over you. The TV is on, but you're barely paying attention. Your mind is still buzzing with the possibilities of the mysterious map, the potential for adventure, the ZZZZZ. Wait, what? Were you just about to? No, you're wide awake. Absolutely. Let's just close your eyes for a second. Just a tiny little blink. It won't hurt, right? Okay, maybe it's time for a little wind down. Let's slow things down a bit, shall we? The edges of the day soften. The world quiets, like a snow globe gently settling. Thoughts drift slower now, becoming whispers in the quiet of your mind. You're safe, you're comfortable, you're drifting. The map, it fades into the background, its cryptic symbols becoming indistinct patterns, like clouds in a twilight sky. The treasure, the adventure, the mystery, they all become less important, less urgent. They can wait. Tomorrow is a new day, filled with possibilities. But for now, there is only peace. Imagine the weight of the day lifting from your shoulders, like a soft blanket being pulled away. Your breath becomes slow and even, a gentle rhythm in the stillness. Each inhale bringing relaxation, each exhale releasing tension. The room around you melts into a soft, hazy blur. Colors become muted, sounds become distant. There is only the feeling of comfort, of warmth, of letting go. You are sinking deeper and deeper into the cushions, into the quiet, into sleep. The images fade now, the mailbox, the map, the mysteries, all gone. Only a gentle darkness remains, a welcoming emptiness, a promise of sweet dreams. Just let go, and drift, and sleep. Sweet dreams.